A man of the arts. He has a wealth of knowledge and a way with words too. He values authenticity above all else. He cares about health, healthy environments, healthy bodies, and of course, healthy minds, which is why we decided to talk to him. He had so much to teach, even without knowing it. My conversation with Mr. Joseph Awuah-Darko was insightful.
Hi, my name is Joseph Iwadoku. I'm a Ghanaian. I was born in the UK, but I recently just finished my undergraduate at Ashesi University. In a professional capacity, I'm a contemporary art advisor. So I currently advise for the Sugar Beale Gallery in London. I'm also the founder of the Agbogbloshine Initiative, which is an NGO which does a lot of brand awareness in the on electronic waste dumping and sort of the ecology of the circular economy at the Agbogbloshine dump site. Amongst many other things, I also love and collect African contemporary art, and yeah, I'm also on the youth board of the Kwehenya Art Trust. Two things that are most crucial to me at this point in my life is authenticity and sort of a sense of meaning. So I think authenticity and finding meaning in life, I think those are the two things at this stage I find to be my main prerogatives as a human being right now. Yeah. So with regards to my emotional health, I think it's something that I've thought about since I was in boarding school, I would say. I went to boarding school at SOS Herman Minor International, and that was my first encounter with depression on a very real level. And there was an in-house, I think they called them at the time, counselor, who you'd go and see from time to time, and I would talk about my experiences and how I navigated my academics while trying to keep my sanity or a sense of self and peace in such an intense academic environment. I think that was my first sort of experience with mental health as a concept, or emotional health. And I think I was officially diagnosed, I think that's I think 2 years afterwards, 2 years after my tenure at boarding school, I was diagnosed with as manic depressive, and I think that was when I sort of had to practice actively self-care and sort of taking care of my mental health at all times and finding coping mechanisms and the like. So that's sort of my brief summary of my journey. I think from my point of view, I always try and keep things in perspective. So despite the ubiquitous problems I may face with regards to coping or battling depression on a daily ubiquitous basis, I try and remind myself that I am still very fortunate as a person, and that, I think that in of itself, sometimes we get lost in what we don't have or what we wish we could achieve. And I learned two things actually that were very crucial to me, especially now during COVID season. Your self-worth is not measured by your productivity. It is okay sometimes to have a do-nothing day and just sort of engage in a pleasant hobby and pace yourself. Because I tell my friends, you can't pour from an empty cup. So if you're drained and emotionally unstable, you can't really achieve a lot. And so it's always important to take some time and replenish that as an individual. The second thing is that I do take my coping mechanisms very seriously, and I do keep myself clear of the triggers. So I don't spend too much time on social media. I post if I have to. I just sort of skim through what I really wanted to review. I limit my time and measure it, because I believe you manage what you measure, and then I leave. I don't, I don't succumb to this sort of hook factor of reeling and going on and on and on, because then that isn't really good for your mental health as well. And so I think those are like the major ways in which I deal with it, and sort of as and when I navigate my day. New challenges may come and I approach it the same way. Yeah. Okay, I think that's a good question. You know, it actually isn't one specific thing. I mean, I would say that I have this weird niche fetish of watching ASMR videos to relax and sleep when I get anxious at night. But I think it depends. Like recently with COVID-19, I found a lot of solace in my creativity, and so let's say, as many people might have seen on my social media, supporting local artisans and local craftsmen in weaving a huge sun hat, or sort of reading. I love reading, recreationally especially. You know, just I am keeping my mind busy with activities, or sometimes just going on Netflix and just watching one really good movie, so that I don't think. I think there are a plethora of coping mechanisms, but I wouldn't say that there's one go-to thing with any specificity. I think it ranges from day to day and from mood to mood, and yeah, sometimes, yeah. That's a really good question. I think that's a good one. I think there have been many, but one that definitely stands out was, again, boarding school. I think we're getting a theme here. I think there was one time in boarding school where, so my dad is an actuary. He's an actuarial scientist, which is very technical. So he's an insurance man, and I think I would be third generation. He's running with his brothers a second generation business, which is Vanguard Insurance. And I think insurance is actuarial science is very math savvy. It's and I think when you're young, like super young, as I was when you're in boarding school, boys tend to emulate their fathers, and I thought I would, I think the first epiphany I had, or when I got this huge realization that I wasn't naturally mathematically inclined, I think that was a big breaking point, because you grew up wanting to be like your patriarch, and I realized that I would be nothing like him, and so that was an epiphany in boarding school, informed by the abysmal grades I was getting in my ad mathematics classes, which sort of just took a toll on me. But I think, again, with the help of my counselor at the time, I sort of realized that it was okay to be different, and I didn't have to be my patriarch's spitting image. And then that's when I started to sort of come into my own and rebuild what my identity would be, since it wouldn't simply be a replicate of my dad's. And I think that has informed the trajectory I've taken with my life. Also, fun fact, I'm left-handed, and I think in terms of cerebral capacity, left-handed people use the right side of their brain, which is more creatively inclined, whereas right-handed people, like my dad, use the more technical part of their brain, which is on the left. So I think that was something that I also understood moving forward. But yeah.
That's excellent.
So at the time of that moment I described, at the epiphany, where I realized that I wasn't mathematically inclined at boarding school, I think I definitely knew that it was definitely a deep, sustained sadness that took me throughout, my academic year at boarding school. And in our culture, it's not very heteronormative to cry. It's seen as there's this toxic macho, masculinity whereby you aren't supposed to cry. But I think I did that quite often. Especially at SOS, there's this very lonely walk from the hostels to the actual university campus, and that was heartstrings. But that was when I used to have really bad cries. I think it was more of a sustained depression where I didn't want to do anything, engage in lesson times. Also, I'm quite introverted. I don't really talk a lot, even though. So people have this huge misconception that because I'm arguably articulate that I'm extroverted, but that's not true at all. I'm energized by being in my own space, and I'm drained by being in public. It's the opposite for extroverts, obviously. But I'm very introverted, and so making friends and having people to talk to about these things in a meaningful way was not something I had access to or readily had access to. So I think that's what it more was for me at that point. I think I did. I think in this modern millennial age of Google, you research and you do online tests and you ask all sorts of questions, and yeah, I think I sort of self-diagnosed myself before I was actually formally diagnosed. But yeah, I think I grew to understand that there was a curiosity to understand what was happening to me. Yeah, but at that point I was living in my head, and so my self-awareness has definitely improved over time. But at the time back then, I probably just knew that I was extremely sad. I think one thing that I realized is that whether I like it or not, my privilege gives me a certain advantage and a certain responsibility. I think also I realized that subsequently, due to things I've been engaged in, let's say like being in the Forbes Africa 30 under 30, or being recognized for my work in social entrepreneurship or my artistic inclination, people do look up to me, whether I like it or not. And so I sort of, I mean, I take that sizable recognition, as modest as it may be, seriously, and I sort of wanted to normalize talking openly about mental health. I think there's a huge, having, it's funny that because I've just come back from spending about almost a year in London for work experience, and I've only been in Accra for the past 11 weeks. And the funny thing is that we live in a culture that sort of stigmatizes mental health and depression, and it's sort of, there isn't, even though it affects a lot of us, we don't have this culture of normalizing it in terms of open discussion. There are very few safe spaces in which people can meaningfully talk about mental health. And I think social media is the conduit through which I use to engage my followers and sort of normalize talking about it. And I think also I wanted to break the misconception. I think people don't understand. Social media shows a microsecond of your life, and I think I wanted to break this picturesque idea that my life was perfect and that all I did was fly around, buy art, wear hedonistic designer brands, and just had this lovely airy-fairy life where I just go from accomplishment to accomplishment. I think I wanted people to know that my life is real, and that it is a sinusoidal curve of ups and downs, and that I wanted people to know that that's okay. That we aren't always supposed to be, having fantastic super days. And I think sometimes there's also like a toxic positivity that goes around, whereby you are allowed to validate how you feel even when it's bad, and not only when it's good. I think that was the premise for sort of openly discussing it on social media.
Hi, Joseph.
Hi.
Thank you so much for making the time.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Your experiences are, you have a wealth of experience with work and family and everything else.
Small.
Yeah. And then also sharing, being so honest about your experiences with mental health. I think it's noble because, like we mentioned, we are in a part of the world that doesn't necessarily tolerate that or doesn't create the atmosphere for that.
Fair.
So I'm really grateful.
Likewise.
I'm curious, were there any cultural barriers or any cultural factors that impacted your experience in any way, so made it more difficult or easier, or would you say?
I think the cultural barrier sounds very interesting. I think the context is that because I was born in the UK but I spent most of my life here as well, I think it was a very interesting halfway house. My family is probably where the culture would start from, right? So my dad, who I've mentioned too much in this, is the Nkwasohene of Joabe, and is very he's very traditional in his beliefs and viewpoints. My mother is super Catholic, and my grandmother is actually a dame of the Catholic order. So we've taken a few trips to the Vatican City in Rome. And so, sorry, near Rome in Italy, but definitely I'll send you pictures. So the reason why I'm painting this picture is because I think the belief system of depression from a religious perspective is that it's demonized, right? Yeah. And so when things are demonized, it took my mother a while to learn that it was actually beyond the spiritual realm, which we all, the comfortable spiritual world that we all dwell in Ghana. There's actually a science to depression, and she actually did some self-help and some research herself to better understand me. I think my dad as well, because he's quite traditional in his outlook. He also he was actually the one who recommended that I see my first clinical psychologist when it became serious. Because I think I haven't opened up about the fact that I have been suicidal on moments between my adolescence and my adulthood, and so he was the first to sort of put me in touch with the clinical psychologist in South Africa, because we spent some time in Johannesburg as well, because we played polo as fun. We were very equestrian, and so I think it was definitely a learning curve for everybody involved. But I acknowledge that I'm lucky in the sense that, again, I come from a family whereby people are fairly well educated and have the means as well to invest in getting their kids good clinical help, and when it comes to mental health, whereby some more typical Ghanaian families would not even consider it to be a thing, to invest in.
That's insightful. Now that you mentioned suicide, I would like to explore that a little bit, because it's also a touchy area.
No, fair.
Now, is it an experience you're able to describe? The sense of feeling suicidal.
I think you sort of, I think the best metaphor, it is an abyss of emptiness.
Right.
You don't really, at that point in time, you don't really see your life going beyond that point in time. Also, it's always been, it's a very trite, overly used quote, but it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, right? But in the moment, you don't see that it's temporary because of the pain, and you can't see past, exactly. And so I think for me, that was what it was. And I think as time has progressed, I've been able to learn to avoid those triggers, and sort of, again, put my life in clear perspective. And knowing that I am here now, living my life, also makes me understand that no matter how trepidatious life gets, and no matter the hurdles that seem insurmountable, you should always take a step back and keep things in perspective. It's a simple thing that I realize that it is much easier said than done, but once done, actually creates a much more healthier mindset. Also, I always tell my team that it's very important to humble yourself to the serendipity of life. There's something called the butterfly effect, whereby the events that happen in your life are sometimes arguably arbitrary and also half chance.
Yes.
You and I meeting, for example, as well.
Oh, that's a big example of that.
If I hadn't responded to your message, to your DM, if I hadn't, it's a series of events led to us meeting now.
Absolutely.
And so I think some within our control, some not within our control. So I think humbling yourself to the serendipity and the spontaneity of life also keeps a healthy perspective going on as well.
And understanding that things can happen.
Exactly.
And a lot of the time it's for good.
True.
Don't look
Exactly.
forward to it, but
and that even in the bad things that happen, there's always collateral beauty.
Absolutely. Wow. There's always collateral beauty. That sounds so profound. I like that. I really like that.
I've always learned that.
Wow. But I'm curious, Joseph, also with being able to help people, because I guess sometimes the difficulty with discussing mental health is that we're illiterate about how to help people. We might want to, but we don't know how. Okay, so thinking with the benefit of hindsight, what would have been helpful thing for someone to say to you? Or you've mentioned that you're introverted, yes.
Fair.
But if someone could have said something to you
at the time,
offered a service or given you direction, what would it be?
I definitely think that the first thing is for people around you that aren't, or who don't have it as a profession as you do, I think it's definitely good to employ empathy. I think empathy is deeply important in trying to understand people, and that recognizing or validating other people's feelings as opposed to trying to shut it down with toxic positivity or with I am Catholic and I am Christian, and I can quote a million Bible verses, but I think sometimes unfortunately I always say Ghanaians have this or Ghana as a nation has this state of moral sovereignty. We're very moralistic and very religious, and that's fine, that's good. But I think sometimes people don't realize that beyond our religious beliefs and our spirituality, it is important to try and also validate people's negative emotions and try also understand it from a very human and critical point of view, right? I think there's a reason why you have educated yourself to become a clinical psychologist, because there is a science to it. The same way there's a science to engineering or mathematics. I think in our culture people should try and develop the habit of actually trying to understand the context and the perspective, and reasons beyond just asking them to read Psalm 91. I think people should go beyond that. It's very lazy. I think, even though I repeat, I am a Christian. I think sometimes it's just very lazy to just tell someone to read a Bible verse and then they'll be fine. It's not holistic enough.
Yes.
And
with the passion which you say, it tells me that you have
Oh.
maybe had experience in that area.
Even my parents had to learn. Even my mother, who's we always say colloquially she's crife. We joke with her sometimes, but who is deeply religious. I think she also learned that she does have to educate herself on
What to do.
exactly, and the technical and the pragmatism, exactly what she has to do practically to help me or enable me as a son in this context. I think she had to go through that, and also add the spirituality to it. I think it's a double prong approach. You can't just have one without the other. I think that was interesting. But I've had endless quick fix suggestions of reading Bible verses thrown at me from different people, and it's not that simple, unfortunately. I wish it was. But
Not that.
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so I from our conversation, I get that you would make a case for seeing a professional.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's important because, I think in the same way when you have a physical injury, you go and see a doctor. I think when you have a mental injury of sorts, you also go and see a clinical psychologist. I think it's important because, yes, you could stay home and take vitamin C, when it comes to health, but it's also good to go for checkups. So I think it's the same dynamic. You might be able to read books or self-help and cope, but I think it's also good to sort of go and get a mental checkup
Seek the help
from
that-
exactly
seek the help that you need.
exactly.
That's fantastic. Joseph, what would you say to young people who maybe in boarding school and who have been in situations that you've been in, or generally young people? What sort of insight, or what would you equip them with in terms of taking care of themselves emotionally?
I think one thing to remember is that nothing worth having comes easy, and that hardship and adversity build character. And I would also say that, again, it sounds very trite, but where there is life, there is really hope. As long as you're alive, things can happen. When you're dead, it's really impossible for anything to happen beyond your funeral arrangements.
Yes, and even that you are not a part of.
Exactly. That's very much outsourced. So I think just being alive in of itself allows for so many possibilities, that you might not have even imagined. And so, I think it's important to acknowledge that where there is life, there is hope, and that to try and destigmatize what it means to have mental health issues by normalizing conversations around it. I think that's very crucial.
That is excellent.
Yeah.
Joseph, it's been more than insightful speaking to you. Thank you so much for honoring
My
the
pleasure. Thank you for
invitation.
having me.
Yes, I've learned so much from you, and I believe that our viewers have too. I expect that it will make our experience, whatever it is that we're going through, easier somehow, will make our burden lighter somehow. And at least we have some direction, so that when it gets too difficult, maybe we even know to see a professional. That's
Exactly.
a good word to share with people. And yes, as trite as it might sound, we remember and we need to remind ourselves that while there is life, there actually really is hope. And the smell of possibility every single morning is something that we should all look forward to. So thank you so much for sitting through with me on another episode of Hearts and Minds Aloud. I look forward to our next episode where we do some more learning.